My name is Lizzy and I'm from Melbourne, Australia. Today I'm going to be talking about using extended techniques and preparations on instruments with gut strings. I've always been interested in old things and new things, and after specialising in contemporary repertoire and experimental improv on the modern violin for a long time, about 8 or 9 years ago I had the opportunity to learn the baroque violin, so I spent 2 years studying historical performance on the baroque violin. It was inevitable that these two areas of my practice, the old and the new, would smash together at some time. So a few years ago I started commissioning new works for the baroque violin, and it became my preferred instrument to use in experimental improv. Today I'm going to demonstrate some of my favourite sounds that I use in experimental improv on the baroque violin. These are also sounds that I often use on the viola d'amore and the viola da gamba. But for today, to keep it simple, I'll just talk specifically about how they function on the baroque violin and how to achieve them on the baroque violin. This is my baroque violin. This instrument would be recognisable as a violin to anyone who's familiar with that instrument, but it has some key physical differences between its modern counterpart that make improvising with it much more interesting for me. And the key physical difference is the strings. So my baroque violin has 3 raw gut strings on the top and 1 gut core silver wound string on the bottom. All of these strings are different gauges, so different thicknesses, and that makes them react differently to different techniques, particularly things like harmonic overtones. Some other differences with this instrument and its modern counterpart are that the fingerboard is a different shape and is attached to the neck in a different way. The neck is in fact attached at a different angle as well. But the shape of the fingerboard on this particular instrument with this decorative piece here means that I can shove certain things underneath the fingerboard, between the fingerboard and the body of the instrument, in ways that I'm not able to on a modern instrument. Another key difference is that the tailpiece is made out of maple in this case, but oftentimes also other woods like ebony. And it's typically made out of metal on modern instruments. And on modern instruments, it also has fine tuners here that can interfere with access between this part of the instrument and this part of the instrument with the bow. And you can also see that the strings are tied on with either loops or knots. And that means that you can activate the parts of the string that lie over the tailpiece. Bowing on the tailpiece itself can also be a lot of fun because it's a relatively light weight, and it just happens to have a particularly lovely tone on this instrument. So this area of the instrument is basically much more accessible on a baroque violin than it is on a modern violin. These are some raw gut strings. They're made out of the intestines of animals that are used in the meat industry. This is a beef gut string and this is a sheep gut string. And you can see the rough texture, hopefully. And sometimes you can see the sinews within the fibres of the string. And they're very much an organic material. They have a very organic sound and they feel organic as well. Some of my preferred extended techniques to use with gut strings include creaking the raw gut strings with the rough calluses of my left hand. It's a very subtle sound, but it's something that gut strings do really well because the texture of the raw gut strings is so rough and it has more friction with the rough calluses of my left-hand fingers. Another of my favourite sounds is overpressure, where I use too much pressure to activate the strings with the bow. So we get a lower pitched, distorted sound. There's a really huge variety of these sort of scratch or grind sounds, as they're sometimes called, with gut strings. So that's a technique I like to explore a lot when I'm using this instrument. And one other extended technique is sul ponticello, or playing with the bow quite close to the bridge where a lot of overtones are activated. The sul ponticello range on gut strings is much wider than on steel strings, so it has a much more varied and interesting timbre with this instrument than with a modern violin. Some of my preferred preparations include some older ideas and some newer ideas. So I like to use paper clips to prepare the strings because they have a really great resonant quality when plucked and a really great distorted quality when bowed. And just a little hint when using paper clips, if you can find this sort of spiral-shaped paper clip, they hold onto the string really well and they're less likely to be flicked off when you're playing violently. I also really like using blue tack because you can put blue tack on the different harmonic nodes of the string, and that means that you can activate them when you bow them. And it also has a really great kind of submarine quality when it's plucked. And one of the older ideas that I like to use is aluminium foil, threaded through the strings. And aluminium foil is probably not a particularly old idea, but Heinrich Bieber wrote in his Battaglia of 1673 for the violonist to thread paper or parchment through their strings to create a rattling sound. And I like to use aluminium foil to get the same quality of timbre, partly because I don't have any parchment, but particularly because aluminium foil can be moulded around the string and it can be tucked in under the fingerboard so that it will hold its place a lot more easily. Composing and improvising with raw gut strings has become the core part of my artistic practice. It is the part of my practice that I find the most fulfilling and interesting, and this intersection of the old and the new is a space that I spend most of my artistic practice inhabiting. The palette of sounds that are available to me when using gut strings is vastly expanded in comparison to using steel strings. And it's particularly all of the in-between sounds that I find really interesting. All of the edges of the sound are really audible with gut strings, and there's a rawness and volatility available to me that is just really fascinating. I hope this mini masterclass might inspire viewers to explore the timbral potential of gut strings and all of the interesting ways that they can be used to make 21st century music.